Officially, the incident never happened. Unofficially, it ended one officer's life and scarred 3 others who were there to see it. It was just before midnight on a fog-heavy night in late October when dispatch sent out a call to a remote property in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The caller reported something massive circling his barn, said it wasn't walking like a bear, and that it stood up when the floodlight hit it. 4 patrol units responded, 2 from the local sheriff's office, 1 from a nearby small-town department, and a state unit passing through the area. The fog was so thick the spotlights barely cut 10 yards ahead. By the time they rolled up on the property, visibility was near zero. They parked at the tree line and moved in on foot. The first officer out took point, calm and composed, the way veterans usually are when they think it's just another nuisance call. But this one wasn't. They reached the barn in a staggered line, flashlights swinging through the haze. For a while, nothing, just the sound of boots in wet grass and their own breathing in their earpieces. Then, a noise, a low rolling growl that carried like an engine idling in a tunnel. Someone whispered, "You hear that?" The lead officer raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a shape moving between the trees. Something tall, heavy, upright. They thought it was a man at first, big, wearing heavy winter gear maybe, until the light hit it just right. It wasn't wearing anything. It was covered in coarse, dark fur. The head was wrong, elongated. The shoulders sloped forward like a hyena's. The eyes reflected white, not amber, not red. White like headlights off glass. Before anyone could speak, it let out a sound so deep it vibrated in their chests. Part snarl, part roar, part something else. Then it moved. It crossed 20 yards in a single blur. One moment it was in the trees. The next, it was on the lead officer. The impact sounded like a car crash. His flashlight spun through the air and hit the ground. Beam aimed straight toward the struggle. The light caught everything. The creature was crouched on top of him. Huge, easily 7 feet tall if standing, maybe more. Muscles like rope beneath its fur. Its claws pressed into his vest, digging through Kevlar like it was soft plastic. The officer screamed, tried to draw his weapon, but the thing jerked its head once, pinning him down. The others opened fire. Muzzle flashes split the fog, 4, 5, 6 rounds. The thing barely reacted. It looked up, eyes glowing bright against the darkness, then turned and dragged the man backward into the trees like he weighed nothing. He shouted once, just one word, and then it was gone. The forest went dead silent. No wind, no echo, just static on the radios. When backup arrived, the others were in shock. 2 pale, 1 vomiting behind a cruiser. The site was locked down within an hour. Wildlife officers came first, then state investigators, then men in plain clothes with unmarked vehicles. Every body cam and dash cam was confiscated. They said it was for evidence, but those files were never logged into the system. The next morning, the surviving officers were brought in separately and told to write their statements. Phrases like upright, humanoid, and wolf-like were removed in revision. What went into the final report was simple: line-of-duty death caused by an aggressive predatory animal. The local paper ran a 2-sentence blurb about a tragic wildlife encounter. No names, no details. But the men who were there didn't sleep for weeks. 1 transferred out of state. 1 quit law enforcement entirely. The last one, the rookie, kept quiet. But years later, he told someone that what haunts him most isn't the sight of it. It's what he heard on the radio a few nights after the attack. Just static at first. Then, faintly, a voice he swears belonged to the officer who'd been taken. It said one word: run. By dawn, the property was sealed off. No press, no civilians, not even local deputies were allowed back onto the site. It was still foggy that morning, but search teams swept the perimeter with dogs and drones. They didn't find a body. They found drag marks leading into the woods, then nothing, as if the ground itself had swallowed him. The mud around the impact site was compressed in a perfect circle. Heavy weight, 2 legs, no paw patterns, and high up on a nearby pine were claw marks spaced like fingers, each gouge driven nearly an inch deep into the bark. One of the tracking dogs refused to go near it. Later that morning, 2 men arrived in plain clothes, driving unmarked SUVs. They weren't local. They didn't wear badges. They spoke quietly with the sheriff, and within an hour, every piece of recorded material, body cams, dash footage, drone clips, was loaded into hard cases and removed for review. No one saw those recordings again. By afternoon, the narrative was already set. The officer had been attacked by a large predatory animal, likely a bear. That's what would be told to the public, to the family, to the press. Inside the department, though, people were cracking. One of the responding officers quit the same week. Another stopped showing up entirely, checked himself into stress leave. The youngest, the rookie, was the only one who tried to stay on duty. He told a friend later that the worst part wasn't the attack itself. It was watching how quickly everyone agreed to pretend it hadn't happened. They were told to rewrite their reports, to avoid words that could be misinterpreted. Anything describing the thing as upright, human-like, or intelligent was cut out. Their final drafts read like they were describing a rabid dog. When one of them asked about the ballistics, the rounds that were fired, he was told that testing didn't show a match to any known tissue. When he asked what that meant, the supervisor said, "It means it hit a tree." End of discussion. Weeks passed. The news coverage was a paragraph in the back of the local paper. The word wildlife was used 3 times in one sentence. The department went silent. The incident number was archived under a false case type. The rookie said that, for a while, it felt like the place itself was gaslighting him, like he'd dreamed it all, until something odd happened about a month later. He was helping clean out an evidence locker. Inside a sealed box labeled from that night was a torn vest plate, the one worn by the missing officer. It was shredded through the center like it had been clawed, fibers bent backward, not forward, as if the force came from underneath. He showed it to a supervisor. The next morning, the box was gone. That was when he requested transfer. It was approved instantly. The case was closed before the end of the year. The report never mentioned the other officers' statements, the ballistics discrepancy, or the claw marks in the pine. Everything that didn't fit the official story was erased. A state wildlife official who examined the scene quietly told someone later that he'd never seen drag patterns like that in his career. He said it looked like whatever took the officer didn't drag him far, it lifted him. When he tried to enter that note into his report, it was removed from the record. Months turned into years. Everyone involved moved on or left law enforcement. A few rumors circulated. Whispers about unmarked trucks seen on the same stretch of road at night. Motion cameras missing from nearby trailheads. DNR patrols avoiding that section of forest altogether. No one talks about it openly anymore. Not because they don't want to, but because they were made to understand they shouldn't. The official explanation remains wildlife encounter, line of duty fatality. But the men who were there know what they saw. And each of them, in separate conversations, used the same exact phrase to describe it. It wasn't hunting. It was claiming territory. 3 years passed before anyone mentioned the incident again. By then, most of the original team had retired, transferred, or simply stopped answering calls from reporters. The department had turned over twice. New administration, new sheriff, new deputies. Then it happened again. It was a February night. Below freezing, snow coming down hard enough to blind the headlights. Dispatch got a call from a snowplow driver along a county road near the forest line. He said something large was standing in the middle of the road. Not walking, standing. Said it didn't move when he honked. When he tried to go around it, it turned its head and watched him pass. The driver refused to finish his route. He parked the plow at a gas station and called it in himself, shaking. 2 deputies were sent to check it out. They found the tire tracks in the spot where the plow had stopped. Beyond that, nothing. No prints, no drag marks, no signs of a bear, elk, or moose. Just disturbed snow in long strides leading toward the tree line. each print too deep and too far apart to make sense. They followed for about 50 yards until one of them spotted movement off to the right, something pacing parallel through the trees. The younger deputy swung his light toward it, but the beam barely reached. Snow was coming down sideways. All he could see was a shape moving low to the ground, then upright again, weaving between trunks like it knew exactly how to stay out of focus. He raised his weapon. The older deputy said, "Don't." Then, from out of the dark came a sound they both said didn't belong to any animal they'd ever heard. Deep, chesty, almost mechanical, like a growl mixed with air being forced through metal. That's when they backed out. They didn't run, but they didn't stay either. They called it in as no visual confirmation. The next morning, a section of the road was closed for erosion damage. That was the public reason. Internally, a message went out. No solo patrols near the northern forest sector after dark. That memo didn't come from their department. It came from the state. Within 48 hours, the same unmarked SUVs from years prior were seen near the tree line. They brought trail cameras, metal cases, and ground-penetrating sonar equipment. Locals thought it was pipeline work. It wasn't. A week later, one of the original officers from the 2019 incident quietly returned to the area. He wasn't in uniform anymore. Word was he'd been asked to consult. People who saw him said he looked thinner, older, eyes always scanning the tree line. He didn't speak to the deputies, didn't file reports, and stayed for only 3 days. On the third night, a snowmobiler passing through that same stretch swore he saw a man standing by the edge of the woods with a floodlight, sweeping the beam across the snow, and just beyond him, something enormous moving between the trees. By morning, that man was gone. The snowmobile rider assumed it was part of a search operation, but later when he mentioned it to a trooper at a gas station, the trooper just looked at him for a long moment and said, "You didn't see that." A month later, a regional DNR report logged a spike in missing deer and livestock cases across 3 neighboring counties. But when someone tried to cross-reference the locations, the data had been scrubbed. Every GPS coordinate had been replaced with private property. Still, the pattern matched. Always near water, always deep woods, always just off a logging road. One of the new deputies, unaware of the older story, started asking questions. He went through the archives looking for the old wildlife fatality case. He couldn't find it. When he asked about it in briefing, the room went silent. The sergeant leading the shift told him flatly, "That's not something we talk about." That same night, that deputy stopped by a retired officer's home, one who had been there the first time. He didn't ask directly. He just said, "Whatever happened back then, it's happening again, isn't it?" The retired officer took a long breath and said, "No, it never stopped." In the months that followed, several locals claimed to see strange lights in the trees at night, bright white narrow beams moving in grid patterns, as if scanning the forest floor. One hunter said he heard what sounded like metallic clanging deep in the valley at 3 a.m., followed by a scream that wasn't human. The next morning, that section of forest was taped off for timber inspection. The same unmarked SUVs were seen again, and for the first time since 2019, patrols were rerouted away from Miller Creek Road entirely. No official explanation, no new case number. The consultant's report was never supposed to surface. It wasn't entered into any official database, and the only reason anyone knows it existed at all is because one copy was accidentally logged in a digital archive under the wrong case number. A clerical error that lasted less than 12 hours before the file was pulled. But in that short window, someone saw it. They printed it, and that's how fragments of it ended up circulating quietly among a handful of officers who'd been around long enough to remember the first incident. The report began clinically: weather, coordinates, personnel involved. Then the tone changed. He described arriving at the search perimeter the night of the reoccurrence. Snow still falling, visibility minimal. He confirmed seeing heat signatures on a thermal scope. Bipedal, approximately 8 feet tall. Body temperature inconsistent with ambient conditions. intermittent readings suggesting partial shielding from infrared. He noted that movement was purposeful, not random, and that the subject appeared to be watching the observation team rather than evading it. At 2:13, one of the sensors captured a shape crossing between two trees. Upright, massive, shoulders hunched forward. The report said it paused at the edge of the camera's range and turned its head toward the lens, as if aware of being seen. Then it opened its mouth. He wrote that there was no sound on the recording, but every member of the team who was present said they felt it. A pressure in the chest, the sensation of standing next to something enormous that shouldn't be there. 2 men vomited immediately afterward. Another refused to go back into the field. The next paragraph was shorter. We were not equipped for this. Whatever it is, it's learned the limits of our response. It knows the search radius, the drone altitude, and the timing of the patrol sweeps. This was not a random encounter. This was a controlled demonstration, a message. He concluded with a single line before the signature block. Recommend immediate cessation of field operations in the Miller Creek region. This is not a wildlife issue. That was the last entry under his name. He left the state 3 days later. Within a week, that section of forest was declared an environmental restoration zone. No hunting, no logging, no entry after dusk. Satellite imagery of the area was updated 6 months later, showing new clearings where the road once ran, but no trace of the structures that used to be there. When local residents asked why, they were told it was for drainage and erosion control. A polite, harmless answer. And maybe that's all it was, unless you know what used to stand in those clearings. Because buried under those newly seeded grass patches are 2 steel containers the size of delivery trucks. No one ever saw them brought in, but a retired road worker swears he watched heavy equipment digging at night, floodlights covered, engines muffled. He said whatever they buried was done fast. One night, in and out. The next morning, there were tire tracks frozen into the snow and nothing else. Today, there's no sign anything ever happened out there. No case number, no files, no memorial for the officer who never came home. The department officially records 0 line-of-duty fatalities for that year. But if you talk to the right people, the ones who've been around long enough, they'll tell you to stay off that road after dark. Not because of ghosts or legends, because they know what's still out there. They say the timber crews hear something just past the sound of their chainsaws, a low rhythmic thud, like footfalls too heavy to belong to anything 4-legged. And every spring when the snow melts, new tracks appear in the soft ground near the old service path, always 2 at a time, always side by side, as if something is still walking upright. The final line from that lost report has never been verified, but several people claim to have read it before it disappeared for good. It said, if this ever reaches the public, they'll call it folklore. But I've seen the way it watches, the way it tests our boundaries. We didn't stumble into its territory, it let us in. And that's the part no one in uniform wants to say out loud. Because if that's true, then the thing in those woods isn't hunting us, it's waiting.